This problem is costing players money, it's costing teams money, it's preventing the sport from being everything it can be. Welcome everyone to this week's edition of Fair Territory, and I want to start off this week by talking about a phrase in baseball. Maybe it's a phrase in the general society as well. I don't know because my world is basically limited to baseball. But the phrase is red ass. And I don't like to use even mildly vulgar language on my show or Foul Territory, unlike some of the guys on Foul Territory. It's not my style. But the phrase red ass refers in baseball to someone with a temper, someone who gets excited rather easily. And when someone is acting like that, the phrase players use is, man, that guy's got the ass. Well, I'm going to tell you something as we start the show this week. I've got the ass about pitching injuries. And I've got the ass not just because of what is happening. The injuries to Shane Bieber, Spencer Strider, Yuri Perez, Jonathan Loáisiga within a span of like 3 days? It's not just that. Because this problem did not start last week. This problem goes back years, goes back decades even. And yet the problem persists and the problem is not going away. And what did we have over the weekend? Instead of constructive conversation, we had the usual bickering between the union and MLB. I'm tired of that. I'm tired of this back and forth constantly over every issue. This issue is not a trivial one like the uniforms. This one is really serious. And this is one that, as I wrote today in The Athletic, needs to be addressed and addressed quickly. Now, I understand baseball is conducting a research study and eventually plans to form a task force, and that's all well and good. No one is ignoring the problem. I'm not about to suggest that, and I wouldn't suggest that. Everyone wants to address the problem, but it keeps going on, and one reason it keeps going on is the mentality that persists among some in the game. Some, especially on the analytical side, but not exclusive to them. And their thinking is, hey, let's keep emphasizing velo and stuff and spin because that's what wins. And I refer in my column to a conversation I had with a friend at Wrigley Field this week, a media friend, and he basically said that, hey, how are you going to change this when this is the stuff that is so effective? This is how pitchers succeed. No argument. This is how pitchers succeed. The problem is the sport is not succeeding. And this is why at some point there have to be conversations that take place, really intelligent conversations about where to go with this. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend, and I didn't pretend in the column, and no one should pretend that they have the answers. No one has the answers to this problem. Okay? It is not just in Major League Baseball, it's in minor league baseball, it's all the way down to youth baseball. All pitchers, their parents, their coaches are chasing velocity and spin. Why? Because that is what gets rewarded at the major league level. Okay, we can identify that as the problem. Keith Meister, the Rangers' lead team physician, one of the game's leading orthopedic surgeons, identified the problem about a month ago in an interview I conducted with him. He said that front offices are emphasizing performance over availability. That's what's going on. Give me a guy for 2 innings on a burst in a single game. Give me a guy for 100 innings in a single season. Go as hard as you can, spin it as hard as you can, throw as hard as you can, and if you get hurt, on to the next one. That's where this sport is, and it's not a healthy place. People might say there's so much good going on in the sport, so many cool things happening at this early stage of the season. Why are we focusing on this? Why? Because big names keep going down, because teams keep getting affected, because the sport continues to suffer over a problem that persists and no one has figured out how to address. Now, I referenced the statements by Tony Clark and then Major League Baseball over the weekend. And Tony Clark basically complained in his statement that no one listened to the union about the pitch clock. And he had a point, to be perfectly honest. I don't know why it was so necessary in year 2 of the clock to reduce the amount of time with runners on base from 20 seconds to 18. We don't have enough information. We don't know enough about the effect of the clock, the effect on fatigue, and whether it is truly having an impact on injuries, in addition to what I think are the biggest drivers, the velo spin kind of thing going on. And then, of course, MLB issues its own statement. Well, we have a study that's gone on at Johns Hopkins, an independent analysis, and they said that the clock is fine, that everything is good, and that injuries are not increasing as a result of the clock. 1 year of data. That's what we're going on. And this study, by the way, has not even been peer-reviewed. It has not been published. It is just a study that we have to take MLB's word for it is the final word. No, sorry, not good enough. Not good enough on either part. Clark's statement, as I wrote, was opportunistic, kind of grandstanding, a little bit shrill, and MLB acts like the voice of God, like they've got all the answers. No one has all the answers. That's the problem. And we need to take a longer look at the clock and see if it is having an effect. And we certainly need to drill down on everything else. Training methods, mindsets, you name it. This problem is not going away. This problem has persisted for years. This problem is costing players money. It's costing teams money. It's preventing the sport from being everything it can be. Now listen, injuries are inevitable in baseball, pitchers especially. Throwing a baseball is not a natural action. We all understand that. But when you see what happened over the weekend, when you see what has happened over years now, the amount of injuries that have occurred, when Dr. Keith Meister says, I've never seen more elbow problems in my career, it goes up every year, cooler heads need to prevail. I want to see, we all want to see the best players on the field. That's it. As often as possible. That's the whole thing, and that's what baseball needs to point to with its comprehensive study, with its task force. I get it. Keep going. But pick up the pace, and let's get some answers here. Let's try to figure out the core of this thing, and let's not turn it into yet another chapter in the labor wars. If anything, on this particular issue, the two sides should be highly motivated to work together. All right, that's my rant on the pitching injuries. We had some other news over the weekend that I thought was rather interesting, and I want to go back to something I wrote last week about the Marlins, who mercifully finally won a game over the weekend and ended their 0-for streak. What I wrote last week is that they were on the path to becoming a seller at kind of a rapid pace because, let's face it, they were not necessarily looked at as a contender going into the season, and when you start the season the way they did, you're certainly not going to be a contender. When you're 0-9, it's kind of tough to climb out of that hole. What I didn't include in that article was anything about the manager, Skip Schumaker, who at the time, it had been reported, had a club option on his deal for next year. And my feeling was it was a little premature to talk about the manager. My mistake, because Bob Nightingale of USA Today over the weekend reported something rather interesting. He said the Marlins, who could be the first team to conduct a fire sale, also may find themselves needing a new manager in 2025. And what Bob reported is that Skip Schumaker will be a free agent after this year because the Marlins essentially agreed to void the club option this past offseason. I confirmed what Bob wrote, made a call last night, checked on it. It's true. So Skip Schumaker, like Alex Cora, his contract is up at the end of the year, and here's a guy that last year led the Marlins to their first playoff appearance in a full season since the 2003 World Series run, and really was on his way and is on his way to becoming one of the game's better managers when they basically took his team out from under him. They didn't have a fire sale per se, but they didn't really do anything this offseason to make themselves better either. And then they suffered a slew of pitching injuries, including Yuri Perez, that have compromised them greatly and left them in their current position. Alex Cora, Boston Red Sox manager, I wrote about him about a month ago, and his situation, which is rather interesting as well. It's his walk year, and what I wrote was that, hey, he's got to prove again that he's one of the game's better managers, that it isn't getting away from him in any way. And listen, they've had some down years in recent years, not entirely Cora's fault, maybe not Cora's fault at all, but he himself said he wasn't pleased with the way he conducted the team last year. They're off to a really nice start. The Story injury is devastating, of course, but Alex Cora, should he get to the open market, like Skip Schumaker, would be very much in demand. There are going to be some good jobs open. Trust me on that. There are always good jobs open at the end of a season. We know the pressure on the Yankees and the Dodgers, in particular, Aaron Boone and Dave Roberts, but there will be other jobs come open as well. Toronto could be one. Seattle. I could go right down the list. I don't want to get out of control here. The season just started. But let's face it, managers get fired after every season and sometimes, of course, in season. So these guys, Cora and Schumaker, I don't know if they're going to get the Craig Counsell deal. So Cora might. He's experienced in a big market. He's won in a big market. And if he can win with this team, it will be just another feather in his cap. But they should be in demand. So free agents at the end of the year, the Craig Counsell example taught us that the managerial market in some ways might be shifting. He was a special case. He had done some really unique things with a low revenue team in Milwaukee. But Cora has done some unique things as well. So has Skip Schumaker. Maybe not to the extent of Counsell, although Counsell didn't win a World Series like Alex Cora did. But at the same time, these guys are accomplished. They will be in demand, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it all transpires with both of those managers. Time now for the Inside Dish. This is the part of the show where I talk about a trend in the game, maybe a story I've written, or maybe a chapter from the distant past. And I have a distant past. I've been around a long time. And I want to talk about one of my favorite topics today. It's a topic that actually Mark Carrig, my boss at The Athletic, teases me about. He'll say, you always want to talk about the 0-21 Orioles. Well, I do want to talk about the 0-21 Orioles because I'm permanently scarred by what I saw during that losing streak. And the Marlins' 0-9 start, of course, evoked memories of 0-21. But I always say whenever a team starts like this, and every year there's a team that goes 0-6 or 0-9, whatever, get to 0-15 and then talk to me. Then talk to me about a streak. Because I witnessed the 0-21 Orioles in 1988. This season, I talked about the start of it in a show a couple of weeks ago, my favorite opening day memory, or a memorable opening day with the beginning of that season, which was a 12-0 loss to the Brewers. The Orioles said, hey, it's only one game. Turned out to be 21. All right, 6 games into this streak, at 0-6, the Orioles fire their manager. Think about that. 6 games in, they fire their manager. Now think about this. After they replaced Cal Ripken Sr. with Frank Robinson, they proceeded to lose 15 more. And I have some very vivid memories, as I mentioned, from that time. I was in my second year covering the Orioles for the late Baltimore Evening Sun. I was 25 years old. I wasn't that experienced and I wasn't that good. And I didn't know how to handle what was in front of me. 0-21, building every night. So I did what a lot of writers do, I guess, when they're trying too hard, and I overwrote, and I'm glad that the Baltimore Evening Sun, to some extent, is no longer with us, so people can't dig up what I had back then. It wasn't the greatest. But more on what was going on with the team, because that was much more interesting. So the symbol of that team, in many ways, was a player named Jeff Stone, a fast outfielder the Orioles had acquired from the Phillies the previous offseason in what was something of a big trade. They traded an outfielder named Mike Young for Jeff Stone, Keith Hughes, and Rick Shue. Jeff Stone was going to be the leadoff man, the left fielder. He was going to be an exciting guy, a lot of promise. Jeff Stone started the season 1 for 32. And it wasn't as if he was drawing a lot of walks during that time. He was 1 for 32 with 1 walk. This took place over the first 12 games of the season. He also lost the ball in the lights. That cost Mike Boddicker a victory. And that was, I think, the 15th straight loss to Kansas City Royals at the old Memorial Stadium. Now, keep in mind, you might think, wow, Orioles went 0-21. Wow, they must have had really bad players. Not exactly. They had 2 Hall of Famers on that team, Cal Ripken Jr. and Eddie Murray. They had Fred Lynn. They had Mike Boddicker. They had a couple of other guys who were accomplished major leaguers. Terry Kennedy, catcher. I can go on and on. Well, not that far, but I can go on with a few more names. Well, despite all that, yes, they go 0-21. And Jeff Stone, as I mentioned, became kind of the symbol of all this. So we get to Minnesota at 0-18 in the Metrodome. And Jeff Stone dislocates his finger. And I will never forget this. One of us asked Frank Robinson, the manager, who had now lost 12 straight or whatever it was, past the 0-6 start, what's going to happen with Stone? Does he need to go on the injured list, which was then the disabled list, of course? And Frank Robinson answered the question in a most memorable way. Frank, does Jeff Stone need to go on the disabled list? Frank bowed his head. "I don't know," he said, "but I hope so." That was very memorable. Now, that same trip, before that series in Minnesota started, we went to dinner. Tim Kirkchin was the beat writer for the Morning Sun, Richard Justice for the Washington Post, and myself for the Baltimore Evening Sun. That was the beat that we had back then. Those were the three writers who traveled with the team. And once in a while, this even happens today, the writers would go out with the manager for dinner, kind of an off-the-record affair. That night in Minnesota, Frank had a few. I guess we all probably had a few. I'm not a drinker, but there was a lot going on. And we asked Frank to go through the entire team, every player on the roster, one by one, and tell us who he would keep if he had a choice right then at that minute. And Frank basically said that he would only keep two players, the two Ripkens, Cal Ripken Jr. and Billy Ripken. He was mad at everybody else for whatever reason in each case. I can't remember exactly what it was. And that night also, Tim Kirkchin started teasing Frank Robinson, saying, "Frank, your team stinks. We've got to be here every day covering it. You've got to carry us, and you are not carrying us right now. You've got to give us stuff." It was all in good fun. It was all joking. Frank Robinson says to Tim Kirkchin, "I did give you something today, and you ignored me." And we're like, "What was that?" And Frank Robinson said, "I told you the president called." The president was Ronald Reagan. We all looked at Frank and said, "What?" He goes, "I told you guys the president called." And what did the president tell him? He said, "Frank, hang in there. I know what you're going through." And Frank Robinson told us that he replied, "Mr. President, with all due respect, you have no idea." So with that, Tim Kirkchin, Richard Justice, they were working for morning papers. They raced to payphones, called their offices. There were no cell phones back then. Told them what had happened. They both got short stories out of it because, of course, this was major news that the president of the United States had called the manager of the Orioles in the middle of this unbelievable losing streak. And that was that. The streak eventually ended in Chicago at the old Comiskey. And even on the night it ended, the night 0-21 was over, it was not a great night for the Orioles because Bill Ripken got hit in the head with a pitch and had to go to the hospital. It was like unbelievable that this happened at the end of a horrible streak, what should have been a celebratory night. And no, everyone was worried about Bill. He turned out to be okay, of course. But this story has a happy ending. It actually does. The Orioles go home. They're 1-23. They go home to Memorial Stadium, and the team staged a promotion called Fantastic Fan Night. And the promotion was about supporting this team. Now, people have been driving with the lights on in support during the daytime. That was one thing that went on. There was a DJ who wouldn't come off the roof of some building until they won. All these things were happening. But Fantastic Fan Night was very memorable because the stadium was sold out, 50,000 people. And it was even more memorable because it was historic. That was the night the late governor of Maryland, William Donald Schaefer, announced that the team and the state had agreed on a lease for a new ballpark downtown Baltimore, the ballpark that would become known as Camden Yards. Time now for Grillin Ken. Let's get to your questions. First one comes from Big Jim's Hobbies. And Big Jim's asked a very pertinent question. What is Stephen Strasburg's MLB legacy? One of the best postseason pitching performances in history. Do you agree? Of course, Jim's question is relevant because Strasburg made his retirement official over the weekend, and his legacy is kind of a complicated one. Obviously, yes, he had that tremendous postseason in 2019. 5-0 for the Nationals, who won the World Series. Game 2 of the World Series, he was brilliant. Game 5, he was even better. It was the peak of his career. It led to his 7-year, $245 million free agent contract. That is a big part of Stephen Strasburg's legacy, no question about it. The thing for me, though, is that it also will always be a case of what might have been. Alanna Rizzo on our show last week talked about Strasburg's debut, that brilliant night in 2010, 14 strikeouts in 7 innings. Let's see Paul Skeens match that when he comes up for the Pirates later this season. Of course, Strasburg had Tommy John surgery not long after that. You remember the Strasburg shutdown and all the controversy with that. And then the latter part of his career when after signing that big free agent contract, he threw only 30 2/3 innings the rest of his career. And that, of course, was a shame. It left So many of us thinking, man, this guy could have been almost a Hall of Famer. He was that talented, that good. But injuries, first the Tommy John, later some other things, thoracic outlet syndrome, the surgery for that, all of this contributed to ultimately Strasburg having to end his career prematurely. He signed that free agent contract at 31. The Nationals, of course, expected bigger things. You can argue that, yes, he had an injury history. They should have never gone there. Of course, we all could say that. And at the time, people were saying that. But still, to me, as great as he was, as brilliantly as he shined, I do wonder what might have been. Next question comes from Connor Smith, who asks, is this Dodgers lineup better than the Murderers Row Yankees? Connor, my first question when we're talking about the Dodgers is, are they better than the 2023 Dodgers? That team scored 906 runs, highest total by the franchise since 1953. That's how good the Dodgers were last year. That's a pretty high bar. They were second in the league in runs scored to the Atlanta Braves, who had an amazing offense last year, of course. But 900 runs is not easy to do. At the same time, you look at this offense, and Jed Hoyer, Cubs president of baseball operations, put it really well when I spoke to him last week about them. He said, hey, top of the lineup, they've got three likely first ballot Hall of Famers: Betts, Ohtani, Freeman. Then you follow that on most days with Will Smith, Muncy, Teoscar Hernandez. Those three guys, Smith, Muncy, Teoscar Hernandez, would be the three best hitters on a lot of major league teams. So can they beat the 1932 Yankees, be better than those Yankees? I don't know. I don't know that we can say that. But they're going to be really good offensively. And it's interesting, though, to note right now, as we enter play on Monday, they're only 7th in the majors in runs per game. Listen to who is ahead of them. Atlanta, of course, the Cubs, the Diamondbacks, the Pirates, the Guardians, and yes, the Texas Rangers, who are a tremendous offensive team. So yes, the Dodgers are going to be an offensive dynamo. There's little doubt about that. Whether they're as good as some of those great Yankees teams remains to be seen. Next comes from Mad King Tyler, who asked, if Trevor Story's injury is season-ending, could this fast-track Marcelo Myers call up to the big leagues? Short answer, no. It's not going to fast-track him. Let's remember who Marcelo Meyer is. 4th pick of the 2021 draft, out of high school. So he's not like Nolan Schanuel or Wyatt Langford, a high draft pick out of college who came really quickly because he was more advanced. Meyer has played only 44 games at the AA level, all but one of them last year, and at AA, he didn't hit. Now, I expect he's going to hit. This guy has star written all over him from everything I've heard from people in the game. But just because Trevor Story is down for a considerable length of time, it does not mean the Red Sox are going to fast-track Meyer. They have other options. Great options? No. We're talking about Pablo Reyes and David Hamilton, maybe Romy Gonzalez, maybe a move of Ceddanne Rafaela from center field into shortstop. He can play both positions at a high level. They have depth in the outfield. They probably can afford to do that. They're still waiting to see, as we tape this morning on Monday, just exactly how extensive Trevor Story's injury is and how much time he will miss. But regardless of how they go about this, Marcelo Meyer is not going to be part of their immediate future. All right, final question. This one comes from Christian Martinez, who asks, what are your thoughts on the Royals' early season success? What needs to be done for them to be better contenders? Good question, Christian. And if you recall, at the start of the year, I believe I said on this show that I expect the surprise teams to come from the AL Central, whether it's the Royals, whether it's the Tigers, or both. Based on their starts, it could be both. Now, what do I like about the Royals? I like their rotation. 2nd in the majors right now in ERA, only to the Red Sox. And you know they rebuilt that rotation. Of course, Cole Reagans came in that trade for Aroldis Chapman last year. Then they signed Waka and Lugo. They have Brady Singer coming back, Alec Marsh as well. So far, so good. They've got Bobby Witt. Their offense right now looks like a middle-of-the-pack offense at best, but when you've got a player like Witt, maybe becomes a little bit more. Question I have is the bullpen as we speak here today. 6th in the majors right now, 6th from the bottom, I should say, in opponents' OPS. So only 5 teams have allowed a greater opponent's OPS as a bullpen than the Royals. They're going to clearly need help there, and maybe that's where they have to address things in order to be a real, genuine surprise team and sustain that for the whole season. In the AL Central, no team is that good. All things are possible. The Guardians are off to a tremendous start as well. The Twins, at least right now, we're only talking, 1/116th of the season, do not exactly look dominant. So we'll see how this all plays out, but I am still watching the Royals and Tigers carefully because, yes, I believe still that both can be surprises. Thanks to everyone for their questions. Thanks for watching, for listening. You know where to find us. YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Like us, subscribe to us. Fair Territory will be back on Thursday with Alanna Rizzo. Join us then.
The first bet $1,500 offer is on. Download the BetMGM Sportsbook app on iOS or Android or visit BetMGM.com. Sign up and deposit at least $10 into your new account. Place your first wager and receive up to $1,500 back in bonus bets. If the bet loses, got to use the bonus code FOUL, F-O-U-L. And if that bet does lose, your bonus bets will be available once your initial wager is settled. Gambling problem or concern? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Hey everybody, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. Fair Territory airs each week, and we'd love for you to become part of our community. Here's another video you might enjoy. See you next time.